Why is campus rape such an important issue in our society today? Find out next on Practical Law. Stay tuned. Welcome to Practical Law. I'm your host, divorce and family law attorney Henry Gornbein. I'm also pleased to say that Practical Law is now being co-sponsored by the Oakland County Bar Association. Lately, our headlines have been filled with issues involving sexual assaults on campus, issues involving teenagers, even at a high school level. And today on Practical Law, I'm pleased to welcome David Nacht as we discuss issues involving sexual assault, especially on college campuses. David, welcome to Practical Law.
Thank you, Henry. It's really an honor to be on your show.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Why don't you first of all tell our viewers a little bit about who you are and what your background is?
So I practice in Ann Arbor and Birmingham. I've had this firm just about 20 years. I had worked for a federal judge. I had been at a prominent large Detroit firm. And I wanted to have my own practice where I could represent people in my style and with my spirit. And that's what I've been doing for 20 years. We're a 6-lawyer firm, and we're about fighting for you when you feel small. That moment when you're an employee and you feel like your world is collapsing around you, or you're a student and you feel like your world is collapsing around you. You need someone strong by your side. That's who I am. That's what I do.
David, lately there's been a lot in the headlines with regard to incidents involving sexual assaults on campus, both situations where people have been charged, some where people have been wrongfully charged. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on and why this has become such a hot topic, for lack of a better word?
Sure. We're at an intersection of several things happening, both in the culture and the law. One thing culturally that's occurring is it's far more normal and common for college students to have isolated sexual encounters after a night of drinking with someone who previously had been a stranger. These so-called hookups are a normal, routine part of campus life on colleges across the state and across the country.
Is hookup, David, for lack of a better word, another euphemism for a one-night stand? Or?
Yes, that's right. And you and I might say to each other, "Hey, Henry, let's hook up when I'm in town next week," and we mean something completely different.
Exactly.
For this new generation, it's a way of saying, I'm going to consume alcohol, meet a stranger, hook up with them, and spend the night or a part of the night and engage in sex. And a lot of people do this. They do it consensually. They want to do it. They want to put themselves in that situation. Putting aside one's moral views about this, and there are obviously a wide variety of views, it presents a different culture because college administrators are used to a culture where most sexual encounters happen in the context of a relationship. So if you're in a relationship and you're rude or engaging in boorish or bad behavior and you're pushing the limits, then you can lose your relationship if you treat someone disrespectfully. Before it ever becomes something called rape, you're just a jerk, you're a bad guy, and you're broken up with. And you don't want that to happen, you care about the person, and the end. But if most sexual encounters or some sort of sexual activity is now occurring between people that don't have those relationships and don't care about losing those relationships, then, and also who don't understand each other's social cues, and who both of whom have been drinking alcohol, then it's an opportunity rife for misunderstanding. And that's partly what's going on here. Another thing that's going on here is that the U.S. Department of Education has decided to interpret a federal law called Title IX in a way to put tremendous pressure on colleges and universities to find out if sexual assault is occurring on campus and to pursue it. And the way in which they're pursuing it is an administrative process, and there are significant problems with that process, the way the federal government is requiring colleges to have it. It's a real problem.
What are the I mean, it's almost as if we're saying, well, Big Brother's been here for a long, long time, but now you're having institutionalized Big Brother, and the reality is in most campuses, there are rules, but alcohol and other drugs flow very freely. And you've got youngsters with raging hormones, so you've got a situation that's ripe for some type of abuse, for lack of a better word.
Well, that's right. And the question is, who bears the burden of proving what occurred or what didn't occur was consensual? And historically, you know, I can tell you, I'm 50. When I was in college, the feminist push was for no means no. In other words, what had been a prior generation's norm was that a woman might say no and a man might say, come on, let's go farther. It was my generation where no means no started to really take root. That meant when a woman says no, she means no, and you better back off. And if she says no in a playful way, you're taking a risk if you start trying to persuade her after she says no. We're now at a different stage in the cultural norm among university regulators, the Department of Education regulators, and as of last week, with the state of Michigan legislature, where a couple of legislators have introduced a bill for yes means yes.
I mean, how do you, well, no is no, and I guess it used to be saying if you say no, that's a stop sign, and no means no. So what does yes mean? Why don't you clarify and explain what's going on now?
Well, a lot of my cases we're trying to figure out what clarification is. So one question is a woman too drunk to say yes? Even if she does say yes, is her level of intoxication such that she's unable to consent? Now, obviously, if a person is lying there unconscious, she can't consent. That's not in doubt. That's not a serious question. The serious question is if someone is kind of stumbling drunk, if they've had 7 or 8 or 9 drinks, whether he has been plying her with drinks or not, whether he is aware of how intoxicated she is she in a position to actually say yes, to actually consent? That's one question. Another question, if no one says anything, which is more typical, the boy and the girl, the man and the woman, after the fact, neither one will say, there wasn't a conversation, it wasn't a no, there wasn't a yes, there was activity. The woman will often say, I didn't feel comfortable, I felt frozen. Just like the teenage girl in the St. Paul's case that was on the cover of the New York Times and on Fox News last month. I'm seeing this in a lot of cases. And the question is, did she convey no? Or did her actions convey yes?
But what if you're intoxicated? If you're intoxicated, you're in a different state than you would be normally. And, it's like a lot of the inhibitions are gone. So if you were not intoxicated, you might have said no, or you might have said, let's stop here. So how do you deal with that issue?
Well, if a person has had a couple of drinks, they may be too drunk to drive if they're, say, the legal limit for drinking and driving is 0.08. Right. You could be at 1.0. You could be at 1.2. You cannot legally drive. But you are certainly in your right mind and you can consent to sexual activity. But if your blood alcohol level were at 0.23 and you're smashed, if you're really smashed, you're not in a position to consent. And I think those of us who do this kind of work, we all agree when someone's really smashed, they're really smashed. And they're looking like they're really smashed. And the person who's with them should be able to tell, you know, this person is too drunk. And in the language of an earlier paternalistic, sexist era, there were rules. There's this great scene in Philadelphia Story where Jimmy Stewart and Katharine Hepburn, it's the morning after they were drinking champagne, and Katharine Hepburn is worried because she's engaged to some other guy that she spent the night with Jimmy Stewart. And he says, no, you were worse for wear as a result of drink, and there are rules about that. In an earlier era, it was understood that gentlemen act like gentlemen when a woman has drunk too much.
But those rules have been going on for many, many years.
Those rules seem to be gone. And unfortunately, fraternities, which used to be in the business of forming gentlemen, are now in the business of having alcohol-fueled parties where the whole purpose is to have a whole bunch of drunk women on campus who will engage in sexual activity with the members of the fraternity. And not only that, but we're seeing cases where fraternities are actually setting conditions for admission into the fraternity, where they are not only encouraging, but basically prescribing sexual activity for people to get into the frat. And this is an opportunity for, frankly, for rape to occur.
But isn't this an opportunity where the universities should be slapping down on us? To me, that would be something that would be crossing any line.
So earlier this week, again, I mean, we are right at the hot topic of the news. President Schlissel at the University of Michigan just held a meeting with 70% of the members of Greek organizations on campus at the University of Michigan. And he said, your culture has to change. And there was rudeness in the hall. There were frat members who were making noises in the hall, kind of like that scene in Animal House, where it's a show trial and people are muttering under their breath. I can tell you, if fraternities continue to have this attitude, they're going to find themselves not only the subject of lawsuits, but they're going to find themselves facing, I think, regulatory pressure like they've never felt.
Well, look, I'm going off topic for a minute, but you've got Sammy's from U of M, which has been thrown out because of what happened. It wasn't sexual, but it was vandalism that was alcohol fueled earlier this year at Treetop Sylvan Resort.
I mean, I think, there's no question that alcohol fuels bad behavior. And there is a way in which this generation's approach to alcohol is causing a problem. There's a way of dealing with stress that's healthy, and there's a way of dealing with stress that's unhealthy. And somehow, this generation is making a lot of bad choices involving alcohol to deal with their stress. And the social interactions that they're having are very disrespectful. And disrespectful to property, disrespectful to each other. It's really quite stunning, actually, the level of disregard that people have for each other who go to the same university. Now, that being said, unfortunately, I have seen a number of cases where it wasn't rape, but after the fact, there's morning after regrets. It might not be just the morning after. It might be the week after. It might be the month after. I got a case last year, 4 months after the fact. 4 months after the fact. After she finds out that he's now dating her roommate, she says, I was too drunk to consent to that behavior.
So how do you sort through that, David?
Well, I'm not the one sorting through it. University regulators listen to someone coming forward to make a complaint, and then they call the man in for an interview. Now, I can tell you, if you have a kid going to college, never let your kid go into one of these meetings, either a girl or a boy, without being prepped by a lawyer, because these university regulators are judging your kid. They are judging them. And I have had, recently, we've had young women who have not been believed about what happened to them. And we have had young men who have not been believed. And it is so pivotal that we put together the story with the level of detail that provides persuasion. And that's what lawyers do. You do it in divorce cases. I do it in these kinds of cases. We're not necessarily in front of a judge. We're in front of these university regulators. But we can show through details about text messaging or about how someone appeared intoxicated or appeared not to be intoxicated, about the way they were able to walk, about what steps they had to climb, whether they could get into a higher level bed without assistance. These are the kinds of details that make or break a story. And the consequences are enormous. The consequences for a young woman who believes that she's been violated and is told that she's not being believed, it's devastating. We have seen again and again young women who are just wrecked by these kinds of things. And for a young man to be essentially called a rapist, even if it doesn't go to the police, to be called that, to be labeled it, it's on the transcript, to apply to graduate school, and you have to check the box, yes, I've been found guilty of sexual assault or sexual harassment, it is a career killer.
Well, you can also end up on the sexual offenders list because of the draconian laws on that.
Well, that occurs if there's criminal
yes.
prosecution. And we have a relationship between the universities and the police departments where statements that are made seemingly in private and in confidence are then turned over to the authorities for criminal prosecution. Another reason why it's so pivotal to get legal representation before going into a process.
So basically, the takeaway from the show is if there's any doubt or if you're about to be questioned about some activity, whether you're a man or a woman, get an attorney from the get-go.
Absolutely. I mean, because you need to have someone who can bring you through the process, through the system, like a tour guide. You know, you're unfamiliar with the process. The process has its own rules, not just the written rules, but the unwritten rules of how things kind of work. And someone who can predict for you, here's how it's likely to play out. Here's what the troubling issue is likely to be for the person who's deciding the issue. Here's how the ramifications of this statement could hurt you if later someone goes to the police. We're also seeing civil litigation. We are seeing cases where boys or young men are suing women who go through these processes for defamation. And we're seeing cases where young women are bringing assault and battery cases against young men. Not only that, I want to talk about cell phones. This generation, they take pictures of everything. So I have had in the last year 6 different cases where young men took pictures of the person they were having sex with and sent the picture without the young woman's permission to their frat buddies.
There you got a lawsuit right there. I mean,
not only a lawsuit, there's a felony under Michigan law. In fact, Michigan law has 2 very similar kinds of felonies, one of which puts you on the sex offender list, one of which doesn't. You have invasion of privacy issues in terms of civil litigation. Invasion of privacy may involve insurance companies. A woman might be able to get a substantial recovery from an insurance company if the case is pled correctly.
so you got a whole new, I mean, and I see that all the time in my divorce practice because you've got people who take, in fact, there were sites, there were revenge porn sites that were out there. Now they're being prosecuted because men and women, either husbands or wives or people in failed relationships, were sending pictures that were put on the internet. So
I want to talk, I mean, you know, this is such obviously bad behavior, and to people of our generation, it's really kind of astonishing. But I have to say, the new generation's approach to technology and to sharing online pictures, video, and running commentary about what their daily experience is, it's just a different approach to life and to what is shareable. And it's getting them into a lot of trouble. But I want to talk a bit about, I want to go back to what we were talking about earlier, Henry, this notion of consent, because I want people to imagine anyone on this show who has been in a long-term relationship, it doesn't have to be a marriage, any long-term relationship. Can you imagine what the rape laws will be like if you actually have to ask permission to go from what we used to call second base to third base every single time, say, a husband has sex with his wife? You know, when you've had sex for 47,333rd time, you obviously have a lot of signals back and forth. You can understand each other. If, as some people in the legislature want, and what some people in the victims advocates community want, and I've had a debate with a leader of the Ann Arbor community on this exact subject. If the rape laws allow someone to be charged with an incredibly serious felony, I mean, rape is as serious as you get
yes.
right after murder. I mean, this is awful, right? If you can be called a rapist because you didn't get, yes, I give you permission to touch my breasts, with someone you're in an ongoing relationship with, I have to say, I think it's insane. It's just insane because people don't ask permission as part of our culture. And so if the law goes way ahead of the culture, people will be violating the law when they're engaged in cultural norms. That is a misuse of the criminal statutes, complete misuse. Now, the argument on the contrary is, you know what? When we started criminalizing drunk driving was bad behavior, but it wasn't criminal. And when we started throwing people in prison for third offense drunk driving, people got the message and they stopped killing people as much. And so the argument in favor of making these changes is that, you know what, we really have to change the culture and we're going to use the criminal law as a tool to do that. I am completely I don't think it's going to work, and I'm completely opposed. But there are serious people making this claim, and they have support within the legislature. The governor's wife just held a conference on this subject. At that conference, the dominant voice was this kind of radical feminist position. I have to say, I'm married to a very prominent feminist psychologist who has spent her career studying domestic violence. And she's not at the University of Michigan, she's at Michigan State University. And she shares my view that these changes are really disturbing because they subject people to the possibility of being falsely accused. And it allows revenge accusations. Revenge accusations are real. They really happen. I see it in my law practice a lot. It's not to say that rape is not real. It's not to say abusive behavior is not real. It's just to say that sometimes people falsely accuse people. And if we make it politically incorrect to say that people falsely accuse people and you're innocent until proven guilty, which is exactly what the radical community is demanding. Oh, Hillary Clinton, who is no radical, Hillary Clinton said last week that she thinks women should automatically be believed when they claim they've been raped.
You can't automatically believe anyone in this culture in our society.
You
Let's call it like it is.
You can't automatically believe anyone about anything. That is where law begins. Every lawyer understands that. Every lawyer understands that we need the tried and true methods of cross-examination. We need the tried and true methods of proof and burdens of proof. And if you get rid of that, if you get rid of process, then you get rid of rights. And what you're doing is empowering not just real victims, but anyone who chooses to call herself a victim. And the ultimate result will be to undo the value that we listen to real victims. And I'm not saying, as that horrible guy who was running for Senate in Missouri did, that there's real rape and there's not real rape. There is lots of sexual assault occurring on campus. It's a serious problem. But we can't throw out our protections for people on the mistaken view that somehow only people who have been victimized will come forward and accuse someone.
So we're trying to strike a delicate balance, which is becoming harder and harder, especially in our society where you push a button and someone's statement or someone's offhand remark or photo goes viral. Let me go into one other topic, and that is the media has been filled, and you alluded to it earlier in the show, the senior salute, which seems to me, you had a trial, you had a woman who claimed that she was being raped, you had a boy who I think was 19 at the time, who claimed that it was not rape, it was consensual, but they never consummated it because it was statutory rape because of the difference in their ages. But it seems to me St. John's or whatever the
St. Paul's.
St. Paul's, a prep school very prominent, that the senior salute is institutionalizing. It's saying, you know, how many notches can we get on our bedpost as a senior? So what are your thoughts on that?
Exactly what any normal person's thoughts would be, which is it's disgusting. And we don't expect adolescent boys to think any different, but we expect their organizations to adopt better behavior. You may think something in your head, but groups of people, when they form organizations, should say we should strive for better. And if organizations don't elevate people above their baser instincts, if they in fact indulge the basest instincts,
But they do too often.
then they need to be sued and they need to be shut down. I mean, that's it. I mean, because young women and girls in this case have a right to be free of any of this baloney. Let me put it this way. If a woman goes to work today, I don't care if you're liberal or conservative, the most conservative Republicans believe that a woman should be free from sex harassment in the workplace.
Absolutely.
Right? That was not true when sex harassment laws first came out.
No, and that was 20, 25 years ago when things
but
have changed.
it is undisputed. Well, the notion that a woman should not be free of sex harassment in college or in high school, well, of course she should be free of that. And we have to abolish an institutional culture that encourages sex harassment of girls and women. That being said, people should freely be able to go to a private party and engage consensually in behavior, especially if they are of legal drinking age.
David, we're down to 1 minute. What are some final thoughts you would like to share with our viewers before we sign off?
You know, if you have a daughter, tell her to say no, and tell her to say no harsh. Tell her to look him and say no. Tell her not to be afraid of saying, you go further, this is rape. Because you know what? They're not saying it enough. They're saying it the next day. They're coming to my office and they're in tears. Say it at the moment. Don't be afraid of offending him. Because you know what? He'll be a lot more offended if you call it rape the next day than if you call it to his face that time. Let's empower our women to have a voice. And let's tell our men, don't be a jerk. We are raising way too many jerks. That's it.
We are out of time. David Nacht, I want to thank you so much for being my guest on Practical Law. We've just scratched the surface. I want to thank you for watching Practical Law.